All right, we are live broadcasting. Wait, let me hit the Facebook link here.
Hey, welcome everyone. We'll see people start popping in. We're going live a little early. Looks like we've got some early joiners. We'll just be here hanging out for a few minutes, getting all the technical pieces done. I'm Janee Pizzuto. We've got Stephen over here.
I'm back here getting the Facebook up real quick. I'm super excited about this topic. This is one.
Right. And our next speaker, Kent McIntosh, is with us.
Hello.
Hey, Kent, were you able to participate in any of the sessions from this morning?
I managed to get to a couple of the sessions. So I sat in on a little bit of Jim Knight, and he is always just fantastic to listen to. It's always inspiring. And then got to see Anita Archer.
Excellent.
Janice, one of my rules of presenting is don't go on after children and don't go on after Anita Archer. So you've broken me already.
Next time you have to write that rule down and send it to us. Great.
That's good.
It's my list of demands.
Yeah, it's been a fun day so far, and we're really excited to bring all these amazing thought leaders together to empower educators.
Absolutely.
Let's see who we have here. I'm going to open up my chat and see.
I see some familiar faces out there.
Do you? Yeah, let's tell us. That is funny. Children to look after Anita Archer. Yeah, shout out. Tell us where you're from in the chat, and we'll start welcoming you. We got St. Louis, Missouri, Vancouver, Washington. You know, earlier we had people from Dublin, Ireland, and Scotland, Trinidad, Tobago, Trinidad, and Sao Paulo. So we're getting some international and USA representation. Portland, Houston, Lake Village, Arkansas, Granville, Ohio. Welcome, Beaverton, Oregon, Virginia Beach, Virginia. Thanks, everyone. Cherry Hill North, New Jersey, Oregon City, Oregon, Moala, Page, Arizona. If you're a colleague or fan of Kent, go ahead and say hello in the chat while we're welcoming everyone. I know I am. So Kent and I've watched Kent work for a lot of years. We haven't had too much to actually collaborate, but we've always been able to connect. And somehow we're connecting again, because now it's amazing.
In this virtual world we all live in.
Yeah, I appreciate you answering our call when we asked.
Absolutely.
The behavior piece, I think, is one of the ones that are kind of creating a lot of stress and anxiety for teachers and schools as to how do we, you know, especially if, you know, I've been working really hard on getting our Pbis system in place. We had it really solid, or we were right in the middle of getting it started. And what is this going to look like?
Okay, I think.
DeKalb County School District. Welcome to DeKalb County, Rocky Mountain Classical Academy.
Yeah.
Welcome.
On Facebook Live as well now, so.
Yeah. We are streaming on Facebook Live in case you have friends that weren't able to have access. Just go to our Facebook page and you'll be able to access the presentations, because at Impact Learning and Leading Group, it's sharing is caring, and we want everyone to have access to all of these great sessions. Hello, Klamath Falls, Oregon, Battleground, Washington, Vancouver, Washington. Hey, they're up in your neck of the woods, Stephen.
Hey, yeah, right in my backyard.
We have a whole Pbis division, right? Dinuba. Hi, Michael. It's our friend Michael Adams from Dinuba.
Hey, shout out to Danuba.
Oh, so we have small town Brenning, Northern California, Butte County. I went to school at Humboldt State, so I'm all about that, Northern California. Vancouver, Washington. Nebraska. Oh, second grade teacher in Tiger Tualatin.
Tualatin, where it all began.
Where it all began, right? Well, a lot of people probably don't know, you know, I don't know, you know, that you're right there housed at University of Oregon, the birthplace of the triangle. You-
Depends on who you talk to, but
Some
sure.
debate out there.
Like in terms of the geometrical shape, maybe not.
There's San Diego, Roseburg, Oregon, Jefferson City, Missouri, St. Louis, Missouri. Good representation from the state of Missouri.
Lots of Missouri. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I think I've got your PDF up there as well. So if anybody's looking to download his PDF, it's
Thank you.
his name on the on our website, impactlearnandlead.com, and then go to the schedule for the event, and next to his name on the schedule there'll be a little link that says download materials, and that should work. We've had problems with it today. If it doesn't work, I can't fix it during the session, but I will make sure that when this is all over, everybody will get a copy of the handouts and a link to the video as well. So rest assured, you'll still get them.
Excellent.
Well, it is 1:30. I think we can start, and if you are joining us, is this number 4?
5.
5, we're number 5 now. If you're at number 5, then you already know what Janice and I are going to say here at the beginning. So we want to welcome everybody to Reopening America's Schools, Seizing the Opportunity, and Reimagine K-12 Education Virtual Summit, presented by Impact Learning and Leading. As you know or may not know, my name is Stephen Carney, one of the co-founders of Impact Learning and Leading Group, and this is my colleague, Janice Pizzuto.
Hi, hey, thank you everyone for joining us. It's our pleasure to bring together this amazing event to you for the next 3 days. We want to recognize and thank all of our thought leaders for coming together collectively and collaboratively to serve all of the educators.
It's been awesome. As I said, I think earlier, I'll say it again, all sessions are recorded. Right now they're on Facebook Live, so you can actually access the ones from today there, I believe. And then we will also record them and send everybody who's registered a link so they can access them. They will only be available for as long as the presenters allow us their presentation to be available. So some may be 3 days, others may be the entire summer. So it just depends.
Great.
So please use your question and answer feature to ask Janice and I questions during the session. And then if you're thinking of questions along the way as Dr. Kent speaks, you can pop them there as well. And he has a time in his presentation for a Q&A. Otherwise, have fun during the chat time, but please don't use the chat to try and get a hold of Janice and I. Use the Q&A for that if you have like a technical question or something like that.
Great, thanks. We want to thank our friends at Pbis for making this whole Zoom capacity possible. So thank you, Pbis, for sponsoring the Zoom access for Reopening America's Schools. We appreciate you very much.
Sure do. Thank you.
Okay.
And it is our pleasure to introduce Dr. Kent McIntosh. He has a PhD, is the Philip H. Knight Chair of Special Education at the University of Oregon and Director of Educational and Community Supports. I'm going to have to know what that means, by the way, the Philip H. Knight Chair. You have to share that with me sometimes. He's he's in the research unit in the College of Education. He's the co-director of the Center on Positive Behavioral Interventions and Support. Super excited about this topic. We are grateful to have him join us this afternoon. Welcome, Dr. Kent McIntosh. Talk to us about PBIS.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. And get this up and going. Really, really appreciate the time here and a chance to be a part of something really, really big. And so I want to start by giving my thanks to Impact Learning and also that, let's see, if I move that over, that works well. Also educators and families across the country who are dealing with this pandemic with every level of support as possible. I also want to acknowledge that me presenting from Eugene, Oregon, we're sitting in the traditional territories of the Kalapuya peoples, and thanks to the opportunity to be here and respect to elders and their contribution past, present, and emerging. So here's what I want to be able to do with our time with us. By the end of the session, you ought to be able to describe how we're going to be using systems in schools, why we need them so importantly for reopening our schools, no matter what way, shape, or form that looks. And then I want to share with you some specific actions for what to do to support students' social, emotional, behavior needs using the core practices of PBIS, or positive behavioral interventions and supports, for good continuity of learning regardless of where that comes from. So it goes without saying that these are unprecedented times for us in education. We have students who desperately need to be educated. We also have families who desperately need to be safe. And we don't have really good answers for what to do or where to go next. And I think as we see this patchwork roll out across the US, we're gonna see things look a little bit different. But one of the things that we know is that, you know, these kids really want to be back in school. And even so, their parents want them to be back in school. And so it's really important that we look with intention in how we're going to do it, and how this summer and fall is going to look, that's going to be a little bit different maybe from what we've had before. And what I'd like you to do in thinking about this is thinking about, what does it look like when coming back to school looks like this? When you don't see faces and expressions in front of you? When we have to tell students to stay 6 feet away instead of giving a high five? They can't necessarily see our faces, and the ability to see somebody's welcomingness through a mask when they're worried about the threats that each one of these students might bring in, it is time for us to really think about what are the ways that we can be deliberately welcoming to students in ways that we've done before, but is going to look really different. And so some of the common reactions that we would have in new problems in education, like this returning back and reopening schools, the most common thing we do is we find some initiative or program that we do it once, if we do it at all, and it just becomes one more thing that we are being asked to do. It is the next big thing. We forget, for some reason, all of the good stuff that we know how to do. So instead, I want us to think about how we could do this, and what are the things that are most important? What are the critical features of ways of making this work? So one thing we can do is, we know that students need safe, predictable, and positive learning environments. That is, regardless of their need, regardless of their exposure to traumatic events, and regardless of the location of the learning. And then we also need to assess and provide more support based on additional need. Now, does that sound like something that we already do? Does that sound like systems that we've already had before? If you've got this systems thinking approach, then you probably have, and you start thinking about all of these different things that we're going to be asked to do. Almost all of them are things that have continued forward, that have still been challenges throughout. But as you can see here, when we identify each of these initiatives as its own separate thing, it is very easy for them to fall off of the table and for us to do not a very good job at any of them. But when we've got a framework for which we can address each one of these, it works a whole lot better. And so many of you are using a PBIS framework for addressing students' social and emotional learning needs, for their achievement needs, for partnering with families, for reducing racial inequities, for providing trauma-informed care, for making sure that our instruction is accessible to everybody. And some of you might be thinking, you know what? The most important thing that students need is just for an adult in the building to care about them. And I don't disagree with that, but I think that just asking our educators to care a little bit more is not going to do it. So let me give you an example here. One of our very best evidence-based practices for keeping everybody safe and healthy is washing hands. This is an evidence-based practice that's in place in every school. This is being done by our healthcare workers, but research shows, and one particular study shows that even this evidence-based, easy-to-do practice is hard to maintain. Hand washing compliance in hospitals drops almost 10% over the course of a shift. This is something that we've really got to care about. And that's why instead of saying we need every educator to care more, we need to think about what are the frameworks that we put into place to support them. And so that's why I'm going to share with you some of the elements of PBIS. Some of this is stuff that you know, and some of it is stuff that might be new to you, or you might be thinking, oh yeah, we were doing that, but I never really thought about how integral this could be to reopening schools. I'm going to share with you here a picture from my friend Don Kincaid, who talks about PBIS and the framework as parts of a bicycle. So here's PBIS. It's the frame that holds all of these different parts together. And you've got this seat here. Well, that's the school team and the implementation team that's moving the work forward, that is in the driver's seat. You might have coaching. So coaching is the gentle steering to make sure that we're on the right path and the team is moving everybody in the right direction. Implementation, fidelity of implementation is the drivetrain that moves things forward. The school principal, this is only going to be a good joke if you like bicycles, but the school principal is the derailleur. But what that really means, if you don't know much about bicycles, is that's the thing that shifts the speed up and down. So the school principal's job is to, when a going gets tough, to move a little bit more deliberately. When we need to move fast, to shift the gears so that things move more quickly and that we're able to get to speed really fast. But I think one of the things that's really, really key and that's really important about a bicycle is that when we choose the evidence-based interventions we're going to put into place, that we put them within a framework that allows us to have different kinds of tires or different interventions based on our needs, based on our context, based on our families and what are there. And if we have a frame that only works with really skinny tires, that's not going to work particularly well when we've got to move slowly and deliberately. And it's not going to work very well if we've got these big knobby tires, but we need to move fast. And so that's why having a framework that's flexible for us to be able to put all of these things into place is absolutely key. And then the other part of PBIS that's not part of the bicycle, but it is as important, are our data, our roadmap to make sure that we're going in the direction that we want to go. Okay, so how well is PBIS implemented across the country? We've got about a third of schools, or almost a third of schools, implementing PBIS, and that's affecting more than 15 million students around the country. So this shows how many schools are actually using PBIS. But importantly too, here are schools that are actually reporting fidelity of implementation of PBIS to us at the National Center on PBIS. And you see it's still over 15,000. But what we really care about is the schools that are implementing PBIS with adequate fidelity of implementation. And that's over 10,000 schools across the country. One thing that's really neat to see is that PBIS is not just implemented in the US, but in over 20 different countries across the world, which is pretty exciting to see this framework spread across. So why are people doing this? Why is this so important? Well, in a very basic way, it's because it works. We've got decades of research, some from randomized control trials, some from case study evidence, showing that we see less unwanted behavior with PBIS, more pro-social behavior, higher social and emotional competence, increased academic achievement, improved school safety, and then organizational health, the extent to which adults feel like they're working together. But we can only expect those outcomes to come when we implement all of the critical features as intended. And so that's something known as fidelity of implementation, the extent to which the critical features of PBIS or any other practice are implemented as intended. And most of you already know this, so forgive me, but I think you'll be okay if I say it one more time, that it's absolutely critical that we put those parts in place and that we actually measure fidelity of implementation. There's a couple of really good reasons. One is if we've picked a high quality practice, the more of it we put into place, the more outcomes we're going to see in the direction we want. But the other part is that anytime we assess, we want to get a score, but even more importantly, we want to be able to see what's our next step toward full implementation. And that's what a really good measure of fidelity of implementation does. We at the center have a free website and a free set of tools that you can use called Pbis Assessment that you can use to download, enter, report fidelity of implementation data. You can see this is actually across all 3 tiers of implementation over a number of years. And so you can just look at this over time anytime you need to come back and see where it is. All available with your taxpayer dollars, totally free of charge. But one thing that you ought to be asking anytime somebody talks about an evidence-based intervention is the extent to which it works for all student groups as opposed to just most students. So I like to show this picture in terms of relating to that. And you'll be able to look. I'll pause for a moment. Let's see if you can figure it out. We talk about systems in schools. We talk about systems and what are the messages behind those systems. And so what you've got here is you've got a system that says, welcome home of the dogs. And then you've got a policy below that says no dogs. And so for that, one of the things that we know is really, really critical is to disaggregate our data and to see if it's actually working for each of the student groups that we're most concerned about. And much of our concern in schools, not all of it, but much of our concern in schools has to do with racial equity in school discipline. And so we have evaluation evidence, multiple studies showing that schools that implement PBIS with greater fidelity have lower discipline disparities in schools. But we also have, just coming out in the last few years, some really good data showing how an equity focus within a PBIS framework can decrease discipline gaps even more. So here's some data coming from the state of Wisconsin in elementary schools. And the way to look at this, as you can see, this is across a number of years. And you can see how this is, we're looking at out of school suspensions and decreases in out of school suspensions. So the first thing you ought to be looking at is that red line that says for all students, how are we doing? And you see a decrease from about roughly 11% to about 4%. But the thing that's really neat to see is you actually see decreases for groups that we're most concerned about. In this case, Black students and students with IEPs. So we see those consistent decreases with an eye to narrowing the gap and improving outcomes for everybody. You can see this in elementary schools. You can see this. This is a case study in a K-8 school in the state of Oregon. Here is a middle school in the state of Michigan. So we're seeing with implementing the PBIS framework with intentional equity focuses, decreasing those discipline gaps and improving equity in school discipline. So that's something really, really neat to see. And if PBIS is something that's new to you, I highly recommend just going to pbis.org or just continuing to listen to this session. But what I want to frame our time with together here is around the 5 core practices of school-wide Tier 1 PBIS and how those can be harnessed for the given situation we're in right now. So many of you are familiar with these and you might see some variations, but here are the 5 that I most commonly use. Number 1, that we define school-wide expectations or social emotional competencies for all students. Number 2, we teach and practice those behaviors using our high-quality principles of explicit instruction. Number 3, we monitor and acknowledge pro-social behaviors. Number 4, we respond instructionally to behaviors that we don't want to see, as opposed to exclusionally. That's not really a word, but as of right now, apparently it is. And then number 5, we make decisions based on data. So we're going to walk you through those, but I want you to be thinking about what are the ways that we can harness these systems that many of you already have to support really, really good instruction and learning for students regardless of where they are. So I'm going to go through each one of these. So number 1, define school-wide expectations. I like to show this. This is a campground that our family usually goes to each summer. And they've got clear expectations for you. Just in case that didn't work, they've got it again. And this is intended to be a joke, but I want you to reflect for a moment about what our new expectations are going to be. And to what extent are we going to have signs that look like this all of a sudden in our schools? No coming within 6 feet. And we start seeing students that are closer than 6 feet and students hugging. And the first thing we're going in is saying, no, don't do that. You're being unsafe. You're a threat to our community. That is absolutely not the way to do it. But understanding what is the purpose of that? What's the rationale for that? How can we tie that to, instead of thinking about the no's, the things that we want students to be able to do? So when we think about really good school-wide expectations, number 1, there's a small number of them. Number 2, they're memorable. Number 3, they're broad, which means they can also include safe distancing. They can also include hygiene. They can also include instruction that takes place in your living room as opposed to in the classroom. And they're positively stated. So here's some nice examples that you see around. Here's one example from nearby in Bethel School District of school expectations that are laid out both in English and Spanish around the school. Positively stated, easy to remember, easy to have in your head, and anything that we would want students to do would fit in there. In this case, we're talking about language acquisition and supporting bilingualism, but we can also think about the same in other places as well. So here's an example of a check-in, check-out card, a tier 2 intervention in Lame Deer, Montana, where they're using it to help teach Dene. So the way the school-wide expectations work, the reason why we focus so much on this is that that language is the common language of the school for our social curriculum, for the way that we connect our behavior systems to social emotional capacities, the way that we can use that with each other. It becomes not a set of rules that adults are enforcing with students, but rather a way to live life, this common way that we can encourage each other to do things the right way and focus on that. And we can spread that, not just from educators to students, but from students to students and with families as well. So here's what I want us to think about in terms of supporting continuity of learning. Keeping that consistency of language, and then also harnessing our systems to teach some of those new behaviors. So if you haven't been to our website in a while, go ahead to it, pbis.org, and you can find right across the scroll resources for supporting students during the pandemic. And I'm going to share with you a few of the resources that we have here. With an idea that there are other ones out there, and I'm not going to just talk you through something that you can just go online and download anytime you like. Each of these are also available in Spanish as well. So one resource that I want to share with you is how do we take our expectations for behavior for students and for each other and for the adults in the building and translate that to distance learning. And you might be thinking, you know what? That was great for right now, or gosh, I wish I had that 3 weeks ago, but now our school year is done and now we're not going to need that. And our governor says that we're going to go back into schools. I believe that any school system in the country needs to be ready to go the distance, meaning go to distance learning at any given time based on the facts on the ground. So even if you think you're coming back, this is still critical information. So when we start thinking about how do we want students to act with each other, some of the things that we think about is that students have not necessarily had very good role models for their online interactions with each other. You know, sometimes it's online gaming, sometimes it's social media, and we've all learned misrules about how we ought to behave with each other. So here's some of the things that we know will work the best. Number one is we want to keep the same school-wide expectations that you've had throughout the year and just show how those apply to home. That's going to keep consistency, that's going to keep predictability, and that's going to work particularly well if students are moving back and forth from distance to in-person in schools, or if they're on an A and B day or a different kind of schedule. But instead of having locations around the school, you've got online activities as settings. So we've got entering class, we've got whole group instruction, we've got one-on-one instruction and some kind of breakout room work that's being done, or small group activities. And so using that same strategy of creating an expectations matrix is a great way of doing that. And we want to be really careful to teach some really specific, online specific behaviors. Instead of being annoyed that kids are changing their virtual background every 2 minutes, maybe we ought to let them know why we would expect whether that's okay or not okay, so teach that. And then clarify for students why that would be, what would be the rationale for doing that. And then be thinking about how do we deliver those evidence-based instructional practices online using some of the technology that will help us get it there, whether it's through private chat, whether it's through small group instruction and so on. And obviously attending to equity in access, not just for technology, but even just for a good Wi-Fi connection. And how that really changes our learning experience, as most of us have figured out. Another resource that I want to share with you is supporting families with PBIS at home. This is a way of sharing, of extending and basically saying, hey families, we've got some pretty good systems for supporting students in the work that we do. And we'd like to share those with you. And if you want to use them, that's great. So we've got this resource here for helping define if people want to use a home matrix and identify what are expectations that they're using from school and related to, in this case, mealtime, bedtime, and then also what virtual classroom looks like, and setting up a schedule throughout the day. I will tell you that having a really clear schedule is why you're not seeing my kids in here, although they could show up at any given moment. So I better knock on some wood here all of a sudden. So the other thing that we want to do, in addition to maintaining consistency of language, is using our really good systems to teach these new behaviors that we're getting used to, or at least new heightened attention to some of the same behaviors. So signage in schools, videos for teaching the expectations, particularly in a small enclosed space like the bathroom, being able to have videos to do it, being able to walk students through it as needed. Great examples that you can find online or that you might already have. And it's just saying, how do we pull in safe distancing? How do we pull in frequent hand washing into the systems that we have? And it's going to be really clear. If we've got students who are being expected to stay in their classrooms, and when they go out to recess or when they're in the passing period, that they're not supposed to be getting close to other classes or other groups, that's going to be something that is not going to be instinctual. That's something that we're going to have to teach explicitly and model and practice and pre-correct ahead of time. Okay, so knowing that, is posting expectations enough to change behavior? No. At any given moment, us sticking something up on the wall will not be enough to improve behavior or change patterns of interactions that students have learned over 6 months of not being at school. So that leads us into the second one, acknowledge that PBIS is in its heart an instructional approach for students. And so that means we're teaching and practicing and also, of course, modeling the behaviors that we want to see, right? So here's an example of a hallway expectations lesson. Might look a little bit different these days, but the way that this works is when we are really clear with students, then everybody knows what's expected of them instead of assuming that students know what they're supposed to do just because they're here. We want to avoid as much as possible running into this situation. I did not slap you, I high-fived your face. So here's how we do this to support continuity of learning. We plan for even more intensive teaching and practice of expectations, skills, and routines. And here's what that looks like. So we need to spend the first day, the first week, the first month teaching and practicing and reminding pro-social behaviors. So Springfield Public Schools in Springfield, Oregon is using the time when students are coming back, and especially in kindergarten, especially in first grade, to put everybody involved in instruction, in routines, in social emotional learning strategies, in not thinking that teaching at once is going to do it. We're talking about the full first day. We're talking about a week. We're talking about every Monday for the first month until you feel like students have it, especially those kindergartners who are coming in who have no idea what school is, and we don't really know what environments they've been a part of. So having everybody teach, using some existing systems that you have, whether those are morning meetings or classroom circles, that the school-wide expectations or values are part of the instruction, and we use those specific structures for doing that. And then, of course, what we want to do is monitor our discipline data really closely for any mistakes that students make so that we can build some follow-up lessons. We know we're not going to get it right first thing off in August or September. We know we're going to have to reteach. We know we're going to have to see some of those. So I think that is absolutely important to plan ahead and expect that. So I showed you an example of what hallway instruction may have looked like before this. Here's hallway instruction when we're keeping safe distance, when we're moving students in small groups throughout the school instead of opening that up. The other thing that I want you to take a look at is that recognition poster on the wall, because it leads us right into the third core practice of PBIS, which is monitoring and acknowledging pro-social behaviors, and really thinking about focusing on building this positive to negative interactions of this 5-to-1 ratio, so that we are attending far more to positive behavior than we are to unwanted behavior. So I love this quote. I love that quote too, but I love this quote. It says, "Whatever you feed will grow." And my interpretation of that, when we look for the behavior that we want to see, we're going to see it more often. When we look at it, when we attend to it, when we describe it, when we talk about students using it, that's where we're going to see that. We do not want to have a school with a dearth of acknowledgement for when students are doing things the right way. So I want to share with you a quick story. Maybe some of you have heard this before, but for the last few years, I've been blessed with being able to go to Australia and have brought my family out in Australia. We've done some work with their positive behavior support community out there, particularly in Queensland. And so, yeah, sure, took the whole family out. Why not? That couldn't be a problem. Rented an RV, drove down all these windy coastal roads, no problem, except for one thing. Guess what? The rules are different there. I consider myself a really good driver, and yet the rules are different. So what I want you to think about is, for me, or for you if you're in this situation or have been in this situation, instinctively, what's the way you swerve? Instinctively, where are you looking when you're looking to change lanes? All of that stuff I want you to think about. And then I want you to think about, do you have students in your school who have to make that jump to school norms and school values and school expectations that are very different than the way that they're used to driving? So when I rented the car, and by the way, this is at a ferry stop, so I was not taking a picture while I was driving. You see, they gave me this little bracelet, and that bracelet said, Aussie roads, drive left. It's this little reminder for me to change up my behavior. And that's what, if your school uses these kinds of tickets, that's what it is. It's that drive left intervention. It's that little tip for us to remember to attend to the positive as much or more or 5 times more than to the unwanted behaviors. And if you don't like tickets, don't use tickets. If you don't like the things in the school store, don't do the things in the school store. The most important thing is that connection with a student about how their behavior was exemplary, how they showed growth, how they did something the right way, that behavioral success. So one of the things that we can do in terms of continuity of learning is we can use technology to remind us to acknowledge students, and especially if you're not using something like an acknowledgement ticket or so on. So I wanted to share with you a tool that we have built. It is a free app that you can get on your iOS device, your Android device, whatever that is, and it's called Be Positive. So here it is up on my screen. I click on Be Positive, and it's got these 4 little micro apps within it. And I'm just going to walk you through it real quick, and I'm going to share with you the page where you can download this and use it for free. So first one is a reminder. What this reminder is it's used to help me remember to attend to behaviors that I want to increase. And so automatically preloaded on this thing are 2 things that we know are critically important for improving outcomes. Number 1 is opportunities to respond. Number 2, specific praise. So you might have other things that you want to increase. So you just go here and you click. You can enter any behavior name that you want. Here in this case, I want specific praise, but I really want to catch Sean doing things the right way. So I'm going to put a reminder for me, and now my phone or my watch is going to buzz me at a predetermined interval. And it's just going to remind me to do that in a very unobtrusive kind of way. So I just go in, I can change if I want it to hit every single 5 minutes on the dot, or an average, so it's a variable schedule, and I can change it to any one of these intervals that we have. And I start it up here, and then when it goes off, it simply shows this on the screen. It buzzes, it chimes if you've got your phones, if you've got your sound on. It notifies you through whatever the regular notification system you have. And then while you're doing it, you can actually collect data on how often you did it. And so here's me clicking up, clicking down, clicking throughout. And there it is, it's sitting right there. So you can add as many reminders as you want. The other thing you can do is you can just use the counter on its own. So I can click here for specific praise, and then I can count up and count down my specific praise. And I'll show you how to look at those data. I'm going to share with you this other one, the pre-correction alarm. Pre-correction alarm is for a specific time that I want to be reminded to do something. And so maybe that's right before recess to remind students to wash their hands and keep safe distance. In this case, what I've got is I'm going to remind myself to be at the door greeting students. And I want to do that Monday through Friday, and I do not want to be reminded on the weekends. So I just turned off Saturday and Sunday for that. Then I've also got any other reminders that I want to have in here. In this case, using a little bit of mindfulness before going into a difficult meeting. And I just add whatever I want to into these pre-correction alarms as well. Then of course, I'm going to look at my data. So in this case, I can go session by session and look at it. I can also click on progress and I can see how I've been doing over time. And I can click a button and I can email both this picture and a table with all of these numbers right in it to myself, to my coach, to whoever I want. So I believe Stephen said these handouts are already up on the website. They should be up on pbis.org as well. These are the links to gather, to download Be Positive. I also want to share with you a couple of other resources for Be Positive. The Michigan MTSS network, and most of you are familiar with them, known as MyBlissy. They've changed their name to MTSS Technical Assistance Center. They've got a great webpage on distance learning, and you can grab it there. And then I also made a little short video in quarantine of how I would use Be Positive for distance learning and how I've actually used it in my own higher ed instruction as well. All right, so that's that there. Last one, oh, sorry, second to last one. It's a good thing I've got a visual reminder for myself there. Respond instructionally to unwanted behavior instead of excluding students. So one of the things that if you were me and you got your classroom behavior management training in a certain era, you were probably told to ignore problem behavior and it will go away. Well, most of you know that is very rarely the case. In some cases that works, but most of the time it does not. And so some of the things that we want to be able to do is use effective strategies to discourage unwanted behavior by encouraging pro-social behavior. And one of them, Katrina Ayers shared with me before, it's called the quick redirects. So when a student yells out in class and says, "This is stupid," or "I don't want to do this," or "Why do I have to do this?" or "Oh my God, another worksheet," instead of just ignoring and moving on, you can actually do a really quick response that says, "Hey, I empathize with you. You might be right, and yet instruction is going to go on." It gives that a little bit of acknowledgement of a student's feelings, but also signals to the whole class that instruction is going to proceed no matter what. So one of the things that we know about responding instructionally is that punishment does not teach the right way of doing things. So I grew up on rivers around the country. And we have a saying in river safety, and it is called point positive. And the idea of point positive is that you point, if you're going down a river and there is a rock, you want to tell people, instead of saying there is a rock, watch out for that, you say go to the place that you want to go. Because if you point to the rock, everybody's going to look at the rock and then you're not going to be in very good shape. We do the exact same thing with behavior. Instead of saying what not to do, we encourage students to do. They actually attend and move their body to the thing that we want them to do, instead of getting into a power struggle. If I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And I do this in my classrooms. I do this at home. I do this with my kids in my classrooms at home. I do with them on the river. They know that I'm going to point them in the direction of what to do, not what not to do. And I want to share with you something really, really near and dear to my heart related to continuity of learning. When you get back in your buildings, when you start putting up your classrooms, when you start building your instructional systems, when you start saying, how are we going to make this work? Please, please, reopen school without using public shaming systems. And these are the public shaming systems I'm talking about. I'm talking about the pocket chart with every kid's color on it. I'm talking about the clip chart. These do not work. You might think they work in the short term, but they don't. Students are not attending to instruction. They're attending to, oh my gosh, that kid got clipped down. What am I going to get clipped down? Whatever that is. And if you say, oh no, but I've got the one that's got the purple all the way above and it's still really positive, students are still paying more attention to that than they are to do it. So do not disinfect this stuff. Do not disinfect your clips. Do not get new clothespins. Just throw them out and start the year without that. One of the things that we know in terms of just human decency, praise can be public, but corrections should be private. Do you want to get singled out in front of everybody else about your behavior for everybody to see out there? I'm guessing you don't. And if you're still thinking, gosh, you know, I thought this was PBIS. We got a green, we got a yellow, we got a red, it's data. No, 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 no. It's not a PBIS practice. And if you're wondering about that and you're thinking, you know what, I actually think, you know, you might be talking about a negative way of doing it. I know a way that works for me. I would say, ask yourself this question. Who are the students who are always on red? And almost all the time, I can tell you that it is most likely to be students of color, students with disabilities, students experiencing trauma. And kids experiencing trauma do not need to be told repeatedly that they are screwing up. They already know that they are screwing up. They need to be pointed in the right direction. And so in the same way, we want to share with you some resources for how to remove those public shaming systems and put something more positive in its place. And then where I want to end with, in terms of these 5, is using data for decision making. Collect it, use it, and share it. We've got really good research showing that school teams that share their discipline data and their fidelity data with all staff are more likely to sustain their practices than those, even if they use it for really good problem solving on their own. So share it out. If somebody's contributing to your data system, make sure they know that it's not just a form that they're filling out that's a requirement, that it's actually useful information that you use. But one of the things that I think is really, really key is to, and many of you are already doing this, but it's to start thinking about what are the data that you use to assess how well your systems are working for all students in this environment that we're in right now. Most of you are used to using office discipline referrals. Most students are not getting office discipline referrals in distance learning. If they are, well, we will very soon have Swiss able to have distance learning as a location. But in reality, we know that when we kick a student out of a distance learning session, what's the likelihood they're actually going to come back? What's the likelihood they're going to come back for the rest of the year, you know? But some of the things that I want you to pay attention to, other pieces of data on your dashboard, access to technology, attendance, all of these disaggregated, student engagement with the lessons, and then family reach outs. Are we only reaching out to families if we know that they're going to speak the same home language as we do? Are we only going to reach out to them if we know that their phone number is actually working, or if we think their phone number is working? So measure how well you're working to reach all families, and then disaggregate that so you can see it. I'm going to share with you one little thing left here if you're interested. I've been talking about tier 1 systems, tier 2 systems, tier 3 systems, also really, really critical. I want to share with you a brief that we've just released on adapting check and checkout for distance learning, and what check and checkout data, what systems, what processes, what cards look like in distance learning environments. So this is the end of my talk here. And I believe this is the time when I'm supposed to give you a pep talk. But I am not going to give you a pep talk. You don't need a pep talk. You just need a prep talk. You know how to build systems for welcoming students back into school safely, regardless of where they are. You've got systems to do it. All you need to do is make the tweaks so that they work regardless of the learning environment that you've got in schools coming in the fall. So I really thank you for your time here. Thank you for everything that you're doing. Thank you for the extra hours you've been putting in over the last few months. Thank you for the extra hours of teaching you've been doing at home, in home, with home, etc. And I'm happy to answer a few questions as they pop up as well.
There, wow. Janice, you're muted. Let me get.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed the whole thing. Wow,
You're
Ken.
looking very animated there.
I know. It was such actual, my heart is full because you've answered the call to reimagine K-12 education. You've answered the seize the opportunity that Stephen and I were envisioning, and that you gave some new tools, right, that people can adapt. You gave us some steps that we can take, whether or not we're coming to full, partial, or modified reopening. And you empowered people to feel positive and have some action steps that they can move forward with an eye on implementation and getting it right. So thank you so very much for that very powerful message. I know we have a lot of requests for recording, and it has been recorded, and we've said multiple times that the recordings will be available after the summit. But Stephen, did you have something to kind of reflect on that?
Well, my kids will laugh at me. My kids will laugh at me by doing this, but that was one of those mic drop moments. Really, just the statement of Ken, I think what you gave people today is just some really practical shifts and the ability to think about the PBI systems that they came from before the pandemic and what they're going back to, and how to make those adjustments so that they can still do the great things that framework promises. Your lens on the fidelity and the implementation piece is really powerful. I put down in big letters, don't disinfect your clip charts. That's brilliant. Should be a bumper sticker. So just thank you very much. You absolutely answered the call that we were hoping for, and we just really appreciate. Let's get to some questions. I think we got some really good questions here.
Yeah,
Sure.
You want to ask the first one there, Janice?
Sure. I'm going to pop right to Kenya had a question about, I have had few successes in reaching color families. I speak 3 languages and I've had many barriers. No phone, no job, no internet. So I think that what we're hearing from folks, and not just Kenya, but is as we want to reach out to families to, get that inclusive piece, what are some steps that you might recommend?
Yeah, I'm certainly not an absolute pro at this. And there are going to be some times when it's really, really difficult. But we want to just think about, when we're talking about reaching families, we want to think about this in a 3-tiered way. How can we use universal design to say, let's reach as many families as possible with our regular communications. And then how can we reach out for those who don't respond back? And in some cases, that's going to be a personal reach out. The things that I recommend is don't, follow your district rules. But what I would really recommend is, I've seen a lot of people saying, like, the principal is going to call every single family. Well, if the principal doesn't have a good relationship with that family member or that child, or doesn't have any at all, it doesn't have to be negative, who is going to be the person who they would most likely respond to a text to, who would show up? Can you say, can you find people who you think they know and ask if they've got contact information for them, or ask people to reach out to them? Because it is going to be hard. I don't believe that 100% of every one of the families is going to be contactable, but I'll bet it's going to be more than what you do with your universal work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a great tiered approach, is the way to look at it. And one of the things that when I was in the forefront on the ground working with schools, one of the things we did is we met where they met, right? So if they had a community center at the apartment building, or there were different places, we would subtly invite ourselves, with some food. So, and of course, with the social distancing, there's different things, but I think it's just getting creative and thinking about where people congregate. If I can add something, that would be, and it is, I think, that tiered approach, because we also have our own personal capacity to be aware of, where if I'm, as you said, a principal's meeting with every single family, and there's also that perception of who is it, that's speaking to me, and is that a welcome thought?
Okay, I've got one I'm going to throw your way.
Sure.
Here we go. Let's wait, where'd it go? It just disappeared. Hold on.
There are lots of really good questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are.
It was basically, the question had to do with any suggestions about addressing behavior during Zoom, using Zoom during teaching, and they don't want to dismiss a student, as you stated. So what are some thoughts about how do we address that during these times?
Yeah, there are a few different ways of being able to handle it. And I think that everyone's going to have their own slightly different style. But one of the things that I think about when doing this is, how do I change the environment? So I want you to put yourself into the situation of thinking back when you were a kid of that age and you were not allowed to hang out with any of the other kids in your class. And now all of a sudden there are 29 of them on your screen at that moment. Like, that is like processor overload, and that is a huge opportunity to get lots of connections at once. And sometimes that's going to be in a positive way, and sometimes it isn't. So the things that I recommend is, number one, pre-correct for students. I highly recommend, if you're using, Zoom in particular has a waiting room. So actually, you can actually do a one-on-one check-in and pre-correction with your students as they come in. You try to replicate online what's your process for greeting students at the door. And you're just greeting them at the door of the Zoom room that they're going into. But I also really recommend small groups. If you can break. So my students' teachers are wonderful. They are, instead of saying, I'm going to do, I think they started in March saying, okay, we're going to meet with everybody. And then it was like, whoa, this is way too much. Can we do this? Can I do it in table groups? And can we just meet just a little bit, have, 5 kids that are looking at, or 7 kids, as opposed to 30 kids. I think doing something like that would be particularly helpful. But anytime that we see unwanted behavior, we want to do a few things. Number one, we want to pause for a moment and think about how we're going to respond instructionally, as opposed to being super annoyed. Number two, you're going to ask, have I actually taught that expectation to students? Number three, you want to get curious about the behavior, not furious. Meaning, let's try to understand where they're coming from. What's the reason why? Behavior is communication. What are they communicating? And then number four, you can document as you need and start to understand. When you start to see a pattern of that, you start going, oh, hey, there's a common behavior mistake. So I'm going to teach that, just like I would teach a common academic mistake in carrying or rounding or reading multisyllabic words. It's all the same stuff, just a different content area.
Teach it.
You got it. Not always easy in the moment.
No.
If we expect it, just prepare for it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Absolutely.
You Kent, I thought that you guys had worked on this. Is there a culturally responsive teaching Pbis framework?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If you go to pbis.org and then the topic area of equity, you'll find, and if you click on publications, or you can look at PBIS Cultural Responsiveness Field Guide, you will see a guide that talks about what are the key areas of cultural responsiveness. You'll see actually a companion to the tiered fidelity inventory that asks guiding questions about each one of the items on the tiered fidelity inventory. That's a fidelity of implementation tool. And then it also has in the appendices lesson plans, activities to do with staff to build awareness, lesson plans for instruction in the classroom. There's some great stuff. We are just in the middle of a randomized control trial looking at this, and we're seeing lots of really good outcomes of using that particular resource and the strategies within it. So pbis.org/tools/equity.
Excellent. Thank you for that answer. Sherry, Duncan, I hope you got that answer. Great. We might have time for one more question, and then we'll have to scoot on out of here.
Yeah, Ken, so I'll ask you two questions here, so you could just close us out with the two. The first question is going back to the clip chart. So if we do end up going back in some way, or we're utilizing those clip charts, is there an alternative? What's the alternative to those clip charts? And then if you want to close us with, you know, it's been a while since we've revisited PBIS. How do I reset my mental models, and how do I reset myself to get ready for thinking about reopening? Is there a resource I can go to reground me?
Wonderful. Okay, great. So what do people use if they were thinking, gosh, I liked my clip chart. I thought it worked. I thought it was a good signal to students, but I'm wondering what are the other things to do, because now I'm hearing about all these negative outcomes. So one of the things that I would look at would be something like the student-teacher game. It's a very, very common approach that's used. You can find a handout on it on pbis.org. So essentially what you're doing is, instead of attending to negative behavior, attending to positive behavior. You're turning it into a game of the students versus the teacher. And so you're attending to the things that you want to see more than the things that you don't want to see. And, you know, for some students might benefit from the really clear, even sort of a color system, or you might be used to using other things that are color related for communication, like zones of regulation or something like that. Being private with a student and communicating to them one-on-one privately about where their behavior is going to work a whole lot better. And then my last thing, Stephen, that you had said about where do we go from here? The very best thing I would say, pick up one of the Fidelity of implementation tools, grab your team, assess yourselves on how you're doing, and identify what is the thing that we want to redo? What is the thing that we want to reshape? And many times people are pretty bought into their school-wide expectations, but the matrix that they have and the lesson plans they have could use a little refresh.
Yeah, great. That's wonderful.
Great.
And anybody who wants to, how terrible this is, anybody who didn't get their question answered, you can email me, and I'll try to answer you.
Yeah,
Great.
and just
We'll send you a copy of those.
Yeah, and just to so know everybody, again, this will be recorded. At the same time, Ken said you can email him. So if there's any additional resources you need, please contact Ken, and he'll make that happen for you. Right, Ken?
Absolutely. And there's a question about the videos. Those can stay on as long as you want to host them. And when you're tired of hosting them, we'll take them and we'll put them on our website.
Okay, great. People are going to be happy to hear that. So,
yeah, that's just great.
Janee, is the slide up?
The slide is not up, but there it is. We want to invite everyone to continue. This has been so fun, and we want to keep the conversation going. So you can join us. Sydney is hosting on our Facebook page. You can join in. We'll be at 6:15 Central Time, 4:15 Pacific Time, 7:15 Eastern Time. Anyway, if you like our page, you'll get a notification, and then come in, and Stephen and I will be there with the folks from Sydney, and any of the panelists, presenters that we've had, they'll be there that want to join, and we'll continue the conversation.
Yeah.
So we want to thank.
So next session is you and me, and we are focusing actually on the topic of implementation. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. We'll springboard off of where you landed. How about that? And Ken, we couldn't thank you enough. Thank you for being a part, and thank you for all the great work you're doing with schools and this work around supporting kids in their social emotional learning. We couldn't thank you enough. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Take care, everybody. Good luck out there and stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Bye.